The uncomfortable truth is that Ja Morant won't solve the Pelicans' biggest issues because the center position would still be a bit of a mess. No rim protection, no rebounding, no spacing, no playoffs. Team building's still going to be a problem. It's Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with you on this Wednesday, and we got to talk about an uncomfortable truth. Ja Morant, while fun, isn't solving the Pelicans' biggest issues and is only going to make things worse for this team in the long run. We're going to break down the salary cap, what it would look like. I've got the numbers on a spreadsheet here. If the Pelicans traded for Ja Morant, we'll look at a realistic trade for him. And then how do you build the rest of the team from there if you're trying to be competitive? So we're going to cover it all in today's episode. Oh, then we got more Yves Missi rumors, which are kind of nuts to me. All that and a little bit more in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 12,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. You can also watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every weekday at 10:30 a.m. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. All right, let's break out the trade machine. I use SpotRack's trade machine. I find theirs to be by far the best. The ESPN one isn't great. The FanSpo one isn't good either because it lets you push a lot of illegal trades through too. This is the best one if you're trying to come up with a Ja Morant trade. And let's say Ja Morant is still going for kind of pennies on the dollar in a sense. Your deal has to include one of Jordan Poole or DeJounte Murray. Let's put Jordan Poole in here because at least he's playing, right? Murray isn't. We still don't have updates on him. That's likely what we would be looking at. It would be Jordan Poole, probably would include Kevon Looney in there because he's an $8 million basically expiring deal because next year is a team option. And then maybe you need to include Jordan Hawkins in there too so they can say they got a young prospect. And truthfully, with that trade, you're likely going to need to include at least one first-round pick. It would have to be, otherwise this is a no-go for me, lottery protected. But some sort of pick that, like, if you end up giving up, means you made the playoffs, you're feeling good about where you are. So there you go. That's essentially the start of the trade. I don't know if that actually would be enough to get it done. I don't think Ja Morant's going to go for that little. But say it's Poole, Looney, and Jordan Hawkins to the Memphis Grizzlies in exchange for Ja Morant. The Pelicans, as I'm recording this, are about $2 million below the luxury tax threshold. Unless you've got another deal planned to dump contracts, any trade for Ja Morant needs to keep you under the luxury tax. This trade does by about $5 million. It actually sheds salary for New Orleans. If they don't want Jordan Hawkins, and truthfully, why would they? He makes $7 million next season because the Pelicans picked up his team option. And like, why would you want that on the books? You know, if you take him out of this, this still works because it's essentially even money. The Pelicans would shed about $500,000 worth of salary. They'd be thrilled to do that. Memphis doesn't mind. Memphis wouldn't mind taking on Jordan Hawkins this year either because they're pretty significantly below the luxury tax threshold where New Orleans is not. If you trade for Ja Morant, you go into the luxury tax because we're going to talk about next year's cap. You're going to need to be in the tax next year. If you're in the tax this year, they're not doing it 2 years in a row, in my opinion, especially for a lost year like this. It's just not going to work. So right now, let's say it's Jordan Poole, Kevon Looney, and some sort of protected first-round pick. Where does that leave New Orleans next season? More or less everyone's under contract next year. If you do that, let me pull up Ja Morant's salary cap number for next year because I just lost it here as I kind of put it into my Pelicans draft spreadsheet here because we've got to keep track of this sort of thing here. Ja Morant makes the same amount as Zion next year, which is kind of like ironic and funny in a sense to me here. They make the same amount of money next year. So it's a little over $42 million. You have Zion Williamson, Ja Morant, DeJounte Murray, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Jordan Hawkins, Jeremiah Fierce, Sadiq Bey, Derek Queen, maybe Jose Alvarado, Yves Missi, maybe Carlo Makovich. It's a team option. You could decline it. And then Micah Peavy. That's your team. And you have about $5 million to the luxury tax room with 2 open roster spots. I wouldn't say that is a particularly inspiring team. To me, that's not much of a difference than this year. Your starting lineup of Ja Morant, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, and Derek Queen is very similar to that, truthfully, with Jeremiah Fierce. You still have a problem with defensive rebounding. You're going to have a problem with defense in general. There's no rim protection. There's not enough spacing or shooting in the starting lineup to make that elite. So you need to upgrade the center position because that's the clear weak link there. You need a stretch 5 that rim protects. Who is that guy? Who's that player that you can go and get where you have $5 million to the luxury tax? You would have $13 million to spend on one player in free agency through the mid-level exception. That's not going to get you that guy. If you look at the crop of upcoming free agents in 2026, you're not getting anyone that's going to be kind of a difference maker for the team in that capacity. If we look at them right now, of upcoming centers that you could get, okay, there's Nikola Vucevic, but he's not going to take $13 million. There's Yusuf Nurkic. He's not the answer, though, I think he's likely to re-sign with the Jazz. Zach Collins, okay. Mitchell Robinson's not the answer there if you could even get him. Robert Williams III's not the answer if you could even get him. Maybe Mo Wagner you could sell me on that a little bit, but it's not like he's good. You don't really have a good answer to addressing the center position. And then the idea is, well, you get him in a trade, right? For what other players here is going to net you that guy that you need? How are you going to go and get a Jared Allen kind of player here? You could maybe move DeJounte Murray, but it's not like you're going to get a significant upgrade. And you're going to need to, at that point then, have to use other draft assets for it. And that's not what this team should be doing, right? I think we can all agree on that. So you run into a significant team building problem, I think, with trying to trade for Ja Morant and figuring out what the rest of your roster is going to look like. Who plays center? At that point, you're going like, we're trying to win right now. And Derek Queen, as impressive as he has been, we clearly see he's not ready to contribute to winning at a high level. He's probably not going to be ready to fully contribute. He'll be better to winning at a high level next season. This is why I don't like the idea of a Ja Morant trade. You're going to be just as bad. You'll be more fun. I fully agree with that. But I don't want to just be fun. I would like to actually win games. That's my end goal in talking about it with this team. Say you take Jordan Hawkins out of here. You can offload him somehow in the trade. You have $12 million to the luxury tax. So again, you're going to need to be in the luxury tax. You have to also then fill 3 roster spots in some capacity. How are you going to do that? Trading DeJounte Murray, because that would be the most likely guy to go here, isn't going to net you 2 or 3 rotation level guys, unless you're including multiple first round picks, because he's probably considered a negative at this point in time. Adding Ja Morant, again, I agree. It's fun, but you are rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic as it is sinking. They look different. That's cool, but you're still going down. And it just doesn't seem to really work. I was on Twitter yesterday, I talked with folks, and someone, I don't have your Twitter handle in front of me, so I apologize here. Just ask a question, like, why are you so, critical of this current team, of the current front office versus Griff? And I was like, someone comes in and was like, Griff was never the problem. That's ridiculous, right? It was Jonah, who's built in to boot. Not trying to be mean or anything, which I appreciate, but don't recall you being so critical of the team when Griffin was here. I mean, you were, but not as much, I feel like. And someone comes in, not on GTA, good name, says Griffin was never the problem. It's time y'all realize that. No one hits 100%, but he did well with a group of guys who constantly let him down with health. The issue with Griff is when we talk about the salary cap here, he left it in this state. It's not good. Adding Ja Morant Doesn't matter because you can't build out the rest of the team. If you stand pat, which we'll talk about in a second here, that doesn't do you any good either because the team is expensive and still bad. That's part of the problem. They've never figured out the center position. And if you trade for Ja Morant, you're still not going to figure out the center position. That's going to limit the ceiling for this team, I think. It's going to limit how good you can actually be. So you can't just run it back. Let's look at the salary cap next year. If you keep Jordan Poole and all that, there is light at the end of the tunnel if you do it that way, though. And that I think is important. Let's look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new, boosts, bonuses, and surprises. So it's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. And the timing's perfect, right before the games, right before the weekend starts. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sports book partner of the NBA. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 12,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Become an everydayer means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're all about that everydayer life, we've got the new Everydayer Club. Access to ad-free audio for Locked On Pelicans. You can listen without all the ads, which is compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. Which is going to also mean you can listen to the show quicker, which I think is cool. An invite to the members-only Everydayer Club Discord server, which is going to have a group chat just for Locked On Pelicans included in there. So you can find more about it in the show notes down below. So we're looking at trading for Ja Morant and what it does to the Pelicans' finances going forward. It's not great. You know, you add Ja Morant in, who makes $42 million next year. Again, what does it do for you? And I kind of struggle with that. We've got to keep in mind that the luxury tax is going to be a very real limitation for New Orleans. So you can trade for Ja Morant, but how are you going to add to the center position? You know, maybe it's you move Yves Missi next year, $3.5 million. You've got some wiggle room to bring back salary. You can include future draft assets with it, but there's only so much you can do. It's not like you can trade Missi for a $20 million a year center. You're not going to be able to trade DeJounte Murray to the Cavaliers and get a Jared Allen kind of player and upgrade your roster that way. You know, and does Jared Allen even fit if you have Zion Williamson and Ja Morant on the team? And I don't know if the answer is yes, because you do need some spacing. Figuring out that center position, you know, has been crippling for this team. And the lack of work, truthfully, despite kind of trying, that David Griffin wanted to do, kick the tires on almost every available center, he was never able to pull off a deal. He never got Miles Turner, though he tried. Never got Jared Allen, though he tried. That's all been part of the problem here. You're still going to do this again, and it's going to be a very real limiter for how competitive this team can be. And if you're going to be in the luxury tax to fill out that roster and be competitive, and you would need to, you better get it right, and you better not have limitations like that, and they still will. That's why I'm just not in favor of a Ja Morant trade like that. Now, you then might say, Jake, what would you do instead? So you're correct that you can't just do nothing. At least going into next season, I don't think you need to be selling everybody at the trade deadline. We'll talk about the Yves Missi rumor that I saw in the next segment here. I don't think you need to just dump him. You don't need to just dump Saddiq Bey or a Jose Alvarado or a Herb Jones, at least not at this trade deadline. What it comes down to is you need to decide who you're going to be. If you want to be competitive next year, yeah, go get Ja Morant. You're not going to probably find a better player. Truthfully, you're probably not going to find a better player to help you in the more short term, even if I think that's going to have very real limitations. I want to see the team be a little bit more patient and start thinking about a longer rebuild to get the right kind of pieces in here that could actually significantly win in a couple of years. And Ja Morant's not going to do that for me. You could also go into next season or this offseason with Jordan Poole still on the roster. And all of a sudden then he becomes a $34 million expiring contract. All of a sudden, CJ McCollum, who was an expiring deal, gets traded for a Trae Young kind of player. Is there another one of those type of guys out there that you could go and get? And the type of player I would specifically be targeting is someone who's up for big money that you just know that team doesn't want to give them a new contract. You would be looking to do a sort of extend and trade kind of deal, similar to what we saw with Brandon Ingram going to Toronto and immediately signed an extension there. A player who is extension eligible, that you want on your team in the long run, that their team just doesn't value or doesn't want because of wherever they are, doesn't want to pay big money to. Go and get that guy. Knowing that you're shedding Jordan Poole's contract, you can sign that player to an extension. That's how you leverage the Jordan Poole trade and contract further down the line. It then doesn't become Jordan Poole for CJ McCollum and Sadiq Bey and Kelly Olynyk, who then got a bunch of second-round picks for the Wizards. It becomes CJ McCollum for Jordan Poole, who then became X, and that makes the trade look much, much better. Right now, as it is, the only guy that truthfully falls off the books for New Orleans is DeAndre Jordan, who shouldn't even be on a guaranteed contract in the first place. You can decline, and if you just leave it as is, you have one open roster spot. This would mean picking up the option on Looney, on Matkovic, Jose opting into his player option. That would leave you with about $5.2 million towards the luxury tax with one open roster spot for basically the same roster as this year. You don't want that, right? Like, you don't want that at all. No one wants that. The team shouldn't want that, even though they're kind of indicating that to a degree is what they want. You should decline Looney's option. Matkovic you can keep. That gives you about $13 million to the luxury tax to just get a little bit more creative. You're not going to be competitive next year. That's okay, because you own your own first round pick in 2027. It's actually a pick swap, but you get the better of them, so that's fine. So you have options here to be able to kind of build better and around the guys you want. It gives you time to figure out what to do with DeJounte Murray. Poole could also expire. There's also a world where you can go into the 27-28 season, that feels very, very far away, with $76 million in cap space. You let Poole expire, you waive or somehow get rid of Zion Williamson, let's say, if that's possible. All of a sudden you have like 70-something million in cap space with two rookies entering their third year. A good first round pick that you're adding to that. You can continue to be patient and take on bad contracts for more draft capital than with the cap space that you have. So you're renting the cap space out to other teams, essentially. You could also just sign guys in free agency, which it's a bit far-fetched. New Orleans is never going to kind of figure that sort of thing out. But then you could also trade for big money guys because you can absorb their contracts into the cap space without giving up equal money. There's ways to give yourself sudden flexibility to really pivot and figure out what you want. Waste the first potentially 3 years of fears and queen of them not making the playoffs, and I don't love that. And I don't think this franchise is going to be patient enough to do this in the first place. But yeah, once you look at their salary cap for next year, hearing like these guys are all untradeable blows my mind, because you're basically a luxury tax team again, and you're going to run it back with the same roster that clearly isn't getting it done this year. This is the failing of David Griffin. If they just basically keep everybody, they're still stuck. And again, the center position, while, I think the Yves Missi trade rumors are really telling about that, is going to be Derek Queen in the long term. If you're trying to be competitive next year, that doesn't fit. You'll then need to find the right four to put around Derek Queen, which is not Zion Williamson. But give yourself more flexibility to find that kind of player, or more time to find that kind of player, rather than just forcing some sort of trade for a suboptimal center and trying to be as competitive as you can without actually getting there, and then not having the ability to pivot later. I don't love that. That's what I don't want to see this team doing. That's why I'm very much against short-sighted win now immediacy kind of moves. So coming up next, let's keep talking about it in terms of the salary cap and everything. And the Yves Missi trade rumors out there. That does say something about a direction the team is taking. I'll tell you what that is coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans brought to you by Quo. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our businesses and think there's got to be a better way. There is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make, and that's why this episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. When your business team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. So your whole team can call and text from one shared business number so nothing gets missed. Quo makes it that simple. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. And Quo's AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps so details never slip through the cracks. So it's no surprise that Quo's the #1 business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. So make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/LockedOnNBA. That's QUO.com/LockedOnNBA. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 12,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. For your second listen, it's Locked On Saints with Ross Jackson. Covering everything black and gold. Make Locked On Saints your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the #1 sports podcast network. So if there's a takeaway I want you to have, it's this. It's that the Pelicans salary cap situation is not great. And it's going to really limit what they're capable of doing going forward with the way the collective bargaining agreement works, with the way that money in free agency works with a soft cap, a hard cap, a first apron, a second apron, a luxury tax. It's a lot. It just, the more money you have, the harder it is the less flexibility you have, the fewer ways you have to add players to the team. With Ja Morant on here, they're going to have the mid-level exception, the biannual exception, and then minimum contracts. And that's it. And that's not going to be enough. You can't use those all together to really add the type of player that would unlock that team. And so if you don't have the ability to get that guy, and they won't, in my opinion, maybe they could trade for Ja Morant. They could surprise me. Who knows? There's no point in going down this route because it's just going to keep kicking the can down the road when what you need to truthfully do is just have more or less a hard reset. And that's going to be painful. It means you're going to be bad, but you're going to eventually need to do that. I don't think you need to do that by just dumping everybody, though. And that's why the latest trade rumor about Yves Missi is kind of surprising to me here, because Yves Missi has been playing well for New Orleans, but we're hearing that he is very, very available and the Pelicans are open to moving him. This rumor is 100% true, by the way. This rumor is coming from the Toronto side of things, the Toronto Raptors. They are actively looking to add a backup center to their team or someone that could be a spot starter. They just need some more beef in the front court here. And so if they're actively having trade talks with the Pelicans about Missi, and you have a bunch of Toronto people saying like the Pelicans are open to trading Missi, like it doesn't take connecting the dot. You don't even need to connect the dot. It's the same dot essentially, right? That's Toronto being like, yeah, we're having active negotiations with the Pelicans about Missi, and the Toronto Raptors reporter who said this, trying not to burn his swords and be like, the Pelicans are open to moving Missi. Yeah, that's a good way to put the Raptors are having negotiations with the Pelicans about Missi. There's like so much smoke and fire to this. This is weird to me. The Pelicans reportedly had a list of untouchables: Zion Williamson, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, the rookies and the like. I'm not saying Missi should be untouchable, but of like all the people you should want to trade or be trying to trade, Missi doesn't strike me as that kind of guy. We just went over that the Pelicans salary cap is rough. Missi this year makes $3.35 million. Next year, he makes $3.5 million as well. Why are you actively trying to move that kind of player? He's giving you good backup big man minutes. I don't think he's particularly great, but he's giving you good backup big man minutes. He looks like maybe his ceiling is a rotation big, but for $3.5 million, is that a problem? Like, do you need to offload that guy? Even if you can get a first round pick for him, that first round pick from Toronto right now, let's see where it's like kind of tracking. And I got to wrap up the show in a second here. Toronto's tracking to be the 19th pick. Missi was the 21st overall pick. He's performing fine for the 21st overall pick. Like, I don't see the need to do this sort of trade here. And it just strikes me as, what is this team doing? Missi is has been winning his minutes when very few guys for the Pelicans are. Look, if you just want a clean break from the David Griffin era, sure, go for it. That's why I said I don't feel like Missi is untouchable by any stretch, but I'd be trying to trade Zion Williamson first, Jordan Poole first, DeJounte Murray first, and not referring to those guys as untouchables and be like, let's kick Missi out the door when he's a second-year player who's improving. It makes me concerned again about the process and what this team is thinking. They're not getting much from the center position. If you were to trade for Ja Morant, you're still going to need help at the center position. Missi's not harming you there. It's a lot of, if you're watching me on YouTube, but the hands that I'm using, like, it's a lot of just what is going on with this team. And I actually do struggle to understand it a little bit. Tomorrow's show, let's get weird. Well, we're going to recap the game. We're going to recap the game in tomorrow's show. And we're going to get weird later in the week with some crazy 3-team trades and the real big name player, not Ja Morant, that the Pelicans need to be going after. I'll tell you who that is later in the week on Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Be back with y'all tomorrow to talk about the game against the Pistons.